What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I was honored to speak with Alison Kuo, a New York-based artist who pursues intersectional relationships across communities through artistic engagement. Alison is also the co-founder of Sisters in Self-Defense, a group that unites Asian American women of all ages and teaches them self-defense skills. In this episode, we talk about Alison's current solo exhibition titled You Pick the Moon, which is up at Field Projects in New York City until April 20th. We also talk about Alison's work with Sisters in Self-Defense and the transformation of her artistic practice due to her community engagement in New York City's Chinatown. Stay with us. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so honored to be here with Alison Kuo. Alison, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, Alison, I'd actually like to focus our conversation today on a current exhibition that you have up at Field Projects, which is located in the city. And my understanding is the show is up until April 20th.
That's right.
Okay, fabulous. And the title of your show is You Pick the Moon, which is a fabulous title. I'd like to chat about it eventually. But just to give listeners a kind of brief description of what it is. So the show, to my understanding, it focuses on a single sculpture, which is so interesting. And the sculpture is also named You Pick the Moon. And to me, it looks like an assemblage of a lot of objects. And the way I kind of described it to you and to myself are they kind of look like objects that one would find at a Goodwill. We see a lot of like porcelain figurines. There's a fish figurine, a cat figurine, a lot of costume jewelry, fake pearls, things like this. So to begin our talk, I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your relationship to these objects.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really central to my sculptural work is the relationship that I have to objects and also the relationship that my audience might have to them. So this specific sculpture, it's sort of a tribute to knowledge that I've learned from both of my grandmothers. I am mixed race, so my one grandmother, my Nai was in Hong Kong, and I used to go visit her there. My other one is from New Jersey, and I would say that my whole family were kind of people who collect things. I think part of that might be, as people on my Chinese side that are coming from the diaspora and that had to leave things behind, there's this impulse now to save and remember things through objects. And when I would go back to visit family in Hong Kong, I'd always come home with like little treasures. And my grandmother in the US, I just grew up in her kitchen, which was floor to ceiling objects and framed photos and, dried flowers. Like she learned from things and she valued and saved them. So I've always done that. And then in this piece, I actually incorporated some items from my American grandmother. She collected these porcelain bird figurines. And when she passed away, these were items that were given to me. And as with my Chinese grandmother, you get these things and then you wonder, well, what is my sort of duty to them? Do I save them? Do I display them? Maybe they're not really my taste or, from this time, but they're very meaningful in some way. So I've had this practice for probably about 6 years now, where I have kept items and put them into things that I call trophies or shrines. And it started out as a more personal impulse, but it's become kind of central to what I'm doing in my work. So when you look at the piece, you'll see, the porcelain birds we mentioned. there are a lot of items in there that I have purchased in the Manhattan Chinatown, many of them coming from mom and pop stores that the owners are, they're in their 80s even, and they're ready to wind it down and retire. So I sort of developed relationships with different places where I would go in frequently, sometimes buy things in bulk that I just knew, one day it's there, the next day the whole shop could be gone because they retired and moved to Florida or something. So I collected and saved a lot of these items, and they're also just things that are very commonly found in shops in Chinatown. So there are fish, ceramic fish, those are chopstick rests. Some of these items are no longer produced in China, so as they sort of get sold out of stock in Chinatown, they're being replaced with things that might be made out of plastic, or the styles change, what people are looking for changes. And then I'm just really like a junk picker. I picked up some garbage off the sidewalk today. When I go to the beach, I'm finding rocks and shells. I use
Yeah,
the
I'm curious.
MPA.
Can I pause you for a second? Because you
Yeah.
mentioned the word style a bunch of times. And I think it's so interesting. So this specific sculpture that we were just looking at, and this actually might be a good time to let listeners know that I'm also screening this conversation on YouTube. So if you want some visuals for what it is we're looking at, just you could Google search Art Uncovered podcast on YouTube and take a look there. Also put some images on our social media and website and things like this. But what's really interesting looking at this sculpture and hearing you talk, so the objects that make up this piece are from all different sources, right? So you have your two grandmothers, objects from Chinatown, but you managed to make them look like they all belong together. So how does one do this? Because I assume like where they exist when you find these objects are probably have very different, aesthetics and energies and things like this.
I think that's where the pearls really come in, the artificial pearls. And I wouldn't say that I've ever really been a painter, but I am married to a painter. You can see my husband Williamson Brassfield's painting
Yeah,
behind
I love
me.
that painting.
So I do, I see a lot of painting. I think about it, and there's a way in which both the glue, the colored glue, and the pearls can kind of work to unify things. So something I think about a lot when I'm making work with found objects is transformation. And that could happen through altering it quite a bit, or it could just happen through the context of what's placed together, and things could just be loosely fastened. But that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for always, is like, how can I kind of sweep it all into one feeling? And then once you get closer, then you can start to find all these little moments where you can make up a story, like, oh, this cat is looking at a frog or a fish. So that's kind of where I get to have fun in putting it all together, is starting to create these narratives. And then when I show it, then I hear from people, like, there's people always find one or two things that they're like, I recognize this, or like,
I
I
do. I
really
recognize
like this
almost
part.
everything in here. It's so wild. So
Yeah,
wild. Yeah, it
actually,
really does. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Well, so Will Chan, who asked me to do the show at Field Projects, he came to another exhibition of mine at a nonprofit in Chinatown called Think Chinatown. And he was talking about how there's like a collective nostalgia that we have as Asian Americans, as people of the diaspora. So that's like a term now that I've adopted, because I feel like it's not just about my feelings towards the objects. I'm also aware that these things are in circulation and that a lot of other people have feelings about them.
Yeah, that's great. And shout out to Will. We're a big fan. We interviewed Will a couple of years ago, and he's just such a big supporter. And yeah, we're very grateful to have a relationship with him. Can you tell me a bit about the title of the piece, which is also the title of the exhibition? You Pick the Moon. It's such a fabulous title. I want to learn more.
Of course, yeah. So those words are from my nai in Hong Kong. Um, and it was on a visit where I think she wanted to teach me a little bit more about femininity and also self-care. She spoke pretty good English, and I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese, so she was explaining to me in English her morning routine, which for a long time involved running up and down a flight of 100 stairs behind her apartment, because Hong Kong is, it's on the side of a mountain. So she really, took care of her body. And then she would do Qigong in the living room of the family apartment, which, was this, in a way, kind of like what you see in the sculpture, just, plants and artwork and, lots of family photos. And so her Qigong routine included a movement that she described to me, like, okay, this is what you do next. You pick the moon, and it's picking up the moon out, the reflection of the moon out of the water.
Oh, that's so
So you
beautiful.
pick up the moon, and then you kind of rotate and hold it. So I love that so much. It stayed with me. And then more recently, I was at a temple in Chinatown, and you can pay to get fortunes that are written out in English, which is great, because before, when I'd go to temples, I'd be like, I don't know what this, I don't know what my fortune is, but these are in English. And it was like kind of a warning fortune, like, be careful, like, don't follow this illusion that you could pick up the moon's reflection out of the water. That's,
Oh,
and so
fascinating.
then I was confused, because I was like, is it good or bad? But with a lot of these things, there's no actual good or bad, and there's no actual good or bad fortune. It's more about just thinking about the nature of existence, which is that there are some things that, they could be kind of magical, or they could be also, maybe if you get a little too carried away with the magic, you'll lose sight of, something that you should be paying attention to in reality. And Danielle Wu, the curator, she was finding other artworks. There's a great show that came up earlier this year, of all of the artists who are part of Godzilla, which is a big movement of Asian American artists that started in New York. And there was a scroll painting of monkeys trying to, pick the moon out of the sky.
What is this Godzilla?
So Godzilla probably came up in sort of New York art conversations a couple years ago, when artists from Godzilla withdrew from an exhibition at the Museum of Chinese in America in Manhattan, over a dispute that is still kind of ongoing between the community and the museum, around the museum not speaking out against the construction of a mega jail in Chinatown. And perhaps in their not saying anything, the city had awarded the museum a large amount of money that, one side said it's not connected, another side says it is connected. But it was really the fallout of that disagreement that led to further rifts in the way that the museum was speaking to the community. And so that was around that time Godzilla was going to have a big show at MoCA, and they canceled it. So there is a really strong activist like through line in Asian American arts in Chinatown. And I'm not just talking about Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Korean Americans, lots of, Thai, other people are also involved in this. And in saying that we really don't want to have, the largest, tallest jail in the world in Chinatown. And, it's still there right now. You can read in the New York Times and see photos of the damage that it has caused to a senior center that's next to the building site. The environmental damage, and just the sort of psychological damage of having this monument to imprisonment in the middle of our community.
That's
And
horrible. That's
yeah.
horrible.
So I really admire the way that the Godzilla artists, and that, all the artists in Chinatown, also youth groups like COV, are saying, like, this is a hard no.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it actually was really affirming for me to have Danielle, send me pictures of this work from the show and see that like see the way that artists who have, come before me are also kind of thinking about how to use these like very kind of hard encoded like Chinese ways of thinking, or like not really a mythology, but just sort of like this sort of whimsical idea that's also very serious, the way that it translates into our work, and talking with people at the show about this idea of like um lucky, unlucky, like do I pick up the moon, do I not pick up the moon? I think that's like a very relatable experience, even for, maybe for someone who grew up in Hong Kong. It's there's not, I think when you come to a culture where you're on the inside and the outside, as many Asian Americans do, there's a sort of assumption that people who are like deeply embedded in it, they know all the right answers and all the what everything means. And that's just, and that makes you feel like you can't participate. But once you find ways to relate to people about it, you realize that like, nobody knows these things really.
Sorry for the pause in conversation, all. I just want to take a quick break to make a few announcements. First, we're excited to announce that we are now on YouTube under Art Uncovered Podcast, and make sure to include that word podcast in your search. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything like this, and if you're curious to have some visuals of myself, my guests, and their work, head over to Art Uncovered Podcast on YouTube. Also, we're excited to announce that we are officially a 501c nonprofit platform. So if you would like to ensure the continuation of this podcast, please donate. Any amount that you can contribute will be very much appreciated. You can donate on our website at artuncoveredpodcast.com. And if you can't contribute, please consider subscribing to us either on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcast platform. All right, that's all for our announcement, and now we will return with our conversation with Alison Kuo about her current exhibition at Field Projects in New York City. I'm curious, do you, because you mentioned a reference to painting in terms of like how to kind of bring these different objects from different histories and different aesthetics together. Is your training in painting or in sculpture?
My initial training was actually in ceramics,
Okay.
which is part of why this piece, there's also a whole connection to my family history in China, through a city called Jingdezhen. That is where porcelain has been produced in China for over 1,000 years. So I went to a small liberal arts college in Texas that had what I would say is a fairly traditional program. So I did learn painting, through the kind of like a Renaissance era style of, glazing and all of that stuff. And then I focused on ceramics, studied with a functional potter. And then, leaving the institution, I made art in the ways that I could wherever I was. So coming to New York City from Texas and kind of losing the space and the time that I had in Texas, but gaining like so much cultural information and energy from the people here, I kind of moved into working with found objects because that was just kind of a shortcut to get where I needed to go.
Yeah, Alison, you mentioned to me off air, we're chatting a little bit, and you mentioned something about was it your grandfather that you recently learned? Is he a curator or some, was it a curator or a
So
professor of ceramics or something like this?
I guess I would call him a curator. So this is
Okay.
classic child of immigrants. Like me and all my cousins, were raised to think that our family were scientists, doctor, business person, like these types of professions that are very stable and well respected in, modern society.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was always drawn to art, and I was kind of told like, well, that's not really who we are as a family. And then I was studying ceramics, and I saw that there was a study about abroad program to go to China and study ceramics there. And I thought, well, this is like a great opportunity for me.
Yeah.
So it was with the University of West Virginia. We traveled around China for a month, and we spent a couple weeks at a ceramics university in Jingdezhen, learning directly from people who work in the ceramics production industry there, which completely changed the way I think about making art, because it was not about an individual person's, genius skill or, vision that they can do everything by themselves. No one does anything by themselves there. It's everybody does their part of the process. And you might be the expert mold maker, you might be the expert, brush maker, or decoration painter, or you throw the vessel but you don't trim it. Then there's the trimmer, then there's the glazer, and the person who fires it. So I was already kind of having this profound, like, everything that I thought about art is different now. And then I went to visit my eldest uncle in Hong Kong, and he was like, well, since you seem to be pretty interested in this stuff, I'm going to tell you about your great grandfather. You might want to get a pen out or something. And then he just starts telling me like the story where my great grandfather, he grew up outside of Beijing in northern China. He was an orphan, and he's kind of worked his way up to becoming an antiques dealer. He's working in an antique shop in Beijing, and he was sort of discovered by this very powerful general in the Chinese army, who took him under his wing. And my grandfather became his more or less curator of ceramics, which, because every emperor of China would have their own designs of ceramics produced for them. So there would be a set of ceramics that would be, displayed in like official like court settings, and then another set that would be used in the home. So this general became emperor of China just for 80 days. So my grandfather was the person who
Oh
actually
my God,
designed
that's so
these
funny.
ceramics. And apparently my family,
Wow.
when they had to leave China, and they had some of these items with them when they went to Hong Kong. But a lot of them have been lost to time. But my uncle is now, he's done a lot of research. He's been able to, buy one of these pieces at auction. And he
Wow,
wanted me
that's
to
so
know
special.
about all of this. And I
That's
was
so
just
special.
like, yeah, it was so special. And that's also helped me reframe what I know about my grandmother there, which is that she was very seriously involved in Peking opera and in performing opera her whole adult life as a kind of serious amateur. So it's like, wow, my family was incredibly artistic, and is,
Yeah,
my parents,
yeah.
like everybody, they are artistic. But now that there is information a little bit more available in English, I've just been learning more and more about my grandfather. His or great grandfather, his name was Guo Baochang, and he published a book in collaboration with an English connoisseur of ceramics that was a reprint of a very old text about Chinese antiquities. So my uncle gifted me like a nice
Oh my
reproduction of it,
gosh,
and I
that's so
think that's really going to
amazing.
be something that, it could take me through the next 10 or 20 years of my work, is trying to think about how I relate to these histories, and this specific text that has beautiful illustrations of basically each 2 pages, a poetic description and information about the object on one side in English and Chinese, and then a
Love that.
reproduction lithograph drawing of it. And so the You Pick the Moon, the sculpture, the kind of what started it was that my husband had found this big Chinese pot on the street around the corner from us, and the bottom of it was broken out, but has blue and white paintings of like pheasants and flowers, and
Yeah, that's
so that was what started the piece. And so that's sort of the moon. It's also kind of like a womb. But I think that like a ceramic vessel is like this sort of primary object that it's important to living. Like we need vessels to like drink water,
to feed
cook
ourselves.
food.
Yeah.
And then it's also this like deep connection that my family has and love for beautiful ceramic objects, that just feels, when I said I was like a collector, it's like, where does this come from? It's like I'm always like looking at things, looking for things. I'm also always on Facebook Marketplace, buying up, these older Chinese objects that people have had and they're getting rid of. So,
That's great. What an
yeah, actually,
exciting process.
here, I'll give you, since we have video
Oh,
too.
I love it.
This is my little, one of my cabinets of things.
Oh, that is so fabulous. That is so great. I'm curious, Alison, if we could chat maybe about the installation of this piece in, in the Space and Field projects, because it's such an interesting installation. So the room that it's situated in is painted entirely black, like and it looks like a matte black, like a flat black. The floor, the walls, the pedestals, and then your piece is spotlit. So when I was looking at it, I was like, oh, it looks a bit like an interrogation room, or maybe some kind of like religious relic that's like really carefully lit. I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about your installation choice here.
Sure. That was definitely something that we thought about really carefully, Will and my curator Danielle Wu and I.
Okay.
And Danielle actually in her early art working life, was an assistant to Peter Coyne. And that is actually someone that I had been planning to study with when I was in grad school. I went to the School of Visual Arts and I'd signed up for Peta's class. I was just kind of amazed by her work. And unfortunately, she was sick and couldn't come and teach the class. But Danielle and I talked about the way that Peta Coyne would like to have her work installed, which is usually with a dark gray and dramatic lighting. I think, it's covered in these white and lots of shiny kind of objects. So having a white background for me would kind of wash out the work.
Oh, fair.
So that's kind of where we arrived with the dark paint color. And we had a spotlight just kind of coincidentally, and I wanted dramatic lighting. So it's like, what's more dramatic than having a spotlight?
Yeah.
But it also, I think about, I really love the shows that I've seen at the kitchen. I remember seeing Sandra Perry's solo show there when it happened, and just loving that kind of black box theater environment for seeing art in. And maybe it brings the audience into a slightly different relationship. You sort of are stepping onto the stage with the artwork, and then as you get close to it, you are in the spotlight. So I do really want to encourage that kind of active looking, even, carefully touching the work is something that I would be happy for people to do.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have a background in performance for many years.
Just
I was
gonna
mostly
ask
making
that.
performance.
Yeah.
And I had this wonderful opportunity to do a performance in a black box theater at the Abrams Arts Center, and work with a curator who was also had a dance background and who taught me how to work with this kind of stage lighting and blocking. So I think that ever since having that experience, I kind of bring that with me when I think about installation.
I'd like to read a quote from the press release from the show, because I think it kind of leads into my next question here, which is related to what you just said. So the sentence from the press release, it says that this sculpture, You Pick the Moon, is a metaphor for your ongoing social practice, including your work as co-founder of Sisters in Self-Defense. So because we spoke there about, this idea of performance, I'm wondering if maybe, do you see any relationship between this very like object-based exhibition or this sculpture and your work to either performance art or social practice?
Absolutely. I think that there can't be this work without the work that I do in community in Chinatown, and doing this, anti-violence violence work in New York City, because I see all these objects as part of relationships that I have with places and people. And it's also really important to me to think about who my audience is while I'm making something. And I don't necessarily think or want everyone to find the kind of the same meaning in there, but there are actually these funny little keychains in the sculpture that are in the shape of tennis racket with pocket knives kind of that you can pull out of them.
Okay.
There's a little bit encoded in there of the sort of fierceness of a lot of the women and femmes, queer people that I've been working with at Sisters in Self-Defense. And around the time that I was making this, I was also sort of deeply collaborating with my co-founder Ava Chin, who is an author who writes about violence towards Asian Americans in the US, but has also been a writer about urban foraging and has a great book about it. So one of the things that emerged out of the sculpture was the central figure of what I call the forager, but it's a body that is holding these two kind of rose quartz face rollers, but they look more like walking sticks in the sculpture. And then it has a magnolia flower for the head, and it's wearing a backpack. And it's sort of the way that I think that we move through the world, even though, there's danger, there's threats, there's things that are worrying us, but what we need to replenish our spirits and take care of ourselves is often to do something where we engage with wonder and joy. And so going out into the woods in upstate New York with my friends, my organizer friends, and foraging together, that's the way I feel with them when I forage, is that I'm in this sort of natural wonderland. So
I want to pause you there for 1 second, because I just want to talk a little bit more about what the Sisters in Self-Defense is.
What it is.
So we mentioned it briefly by name, but can you expand a little bit? And you said that your co-creator is what's their name?
Her name's Ava Chin.
Her name, Ava Chin. Okay, great. And so I guess can you tell us a little bit more about Sisters in Self-Defense?
Yeah, so Ava and I started Sisters in Self-Defense together in April of 2021. We hadn't actually really known each other prior to starting this group. But Ava, I think knows pretty much everybody who's in arts and culture in the Manhattan Chinatown. And we were both in this Facebook group for Chinatowns of New York City, because I was there just doing community research. At the time, I was still trying to kind of find my ways into working more directly with people in Chinatown. And it was after the Atlanta spa shootings happened, and it was a very, scary time for Asian Americans and for women. And I was seeing a lot of people in this sort of community group saying that they were buying pepper spray, they're buying, what kind of weapons should I carry? What kind of weapons should I give to my grandmother or my child? I'm worried. And I have a background in studying Kung Fu and Capoeira, and I hadn't really continued that practice in New York. But I know from my training that a weapon is a tool that can be used to protect you, but if you don't have education about how to use it, it can actually be something that can harm you. It can be something that someone can take away from you and use on you, or it could be something that gives you a sort of sense of security that makes you maybe not want to do the other things that you could be doing to, just being alert, or, thinking about which route am I going to take, or can I find someone to walk with me, or all these other things. So Ava and I both suggested the same idea, which is, what if we hire a self-defense teacher and we meet somewhere, in Chinatown outdoors and do a class together. So we started the group that day, basically, that we both had the same idea. And so since then we've done, classes on Zoom. We've done community classes outdoors, like in places like Columbus Park in Chinatown. The first year we really focused on group classes that were more general, like information and, specifically only taught by women of color. And as in the same way as we're sharing this information, we're also taking in from people that would come about, what has happened to you? What are you worried about? A lot of people that come to our classes have had one or many experiences of, racially motivated, verbal or physical violence against them in New York. And so these are just, spaces where we can all like be seen by each other without having, I think there's more of an understanding now that this is real, but at the time, a lot of people from outside of the Asian American community were sort of like, asking me, very innocently, but like, is this real? Does this happen to you? Like, is racism something that happens to you? It's like, yeah. So and Sisters has evolved over time. So we spent a year with a group of students learning Wing Chun style kung fu
What is
together.
this? What is this?
It's a style of kung fu that was actually designed for women and for people of smaller stature, so that, when you are facing an opponent who's larger than you, how can you kind of leverage your body to fight them? And our teacher, Ping Choi, studied for a long time, and his advice to us, and we would talk a lot before class and after about the sort of mentality that you have, because even the term self-defense could be seen as something problematic or something sort of like a colonial idea of like, I must wait until I have been hurt before I do anything to protect myself. So with Wing Chun, it's really like, it's not about, an artful fight where you see, like if you're thinking like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, like a wushu style where you're flying through the air and doing these really cool, acrobatic moves. It's not that. It is like dirty street fighting, like let's get it done and get the hell out of there.
Hell yeah.
And yeah, we just had so much fun studying that. And then most recently, actually through a grant called Hope Against Hate, we were able to teach a lot of group classes. So something I'm calling a self-preservation workshop. So just kind of thinking through all of the practicalities of what you do when you leave, a safe area, home, or wherever you're going out into the world. Like, how do you prepare yourself, but also giving people the knowledge that they need to make decisions, because I do feel that sometimes self-defense classes can be very geared towards saying, memorize what I'm telling you and do it, and you will magically be safe. But that's not really how violence works. And that's not really how the human body and mind work. You don't usually, if you're in a situation, you don't have a lot of time to think. So you need to already have decided, well, if this happens, this is what I will do, and practice it so that it can happen.
Can
So
anyone
that's
join your group?
Yeah, so it's mainly for women of color and queer people, trans people, and elderly people. Also, sometimes people bring their kids with them. I am also like very open to like meeting up with any group of women that just says, hey, there are some spaces that I think it is very important to limit it to people of certain identities, because people need to feel so safe before they're able to really kind of process some of this stuff. But I also, I have a lot of friends of all different identities, and I'm happy to just talk to anybody about it. And there's a long tradition of women just getting together and hiring a teacher to come to your living room and teach me and all my friends, some moves or how to think about this. I also do a lot of just kind of, like the way we're talking now, or, just I might do like a little 5-minute primer for somebody, just when we're out and about in our lives. Sometimes we don't have time to like come to a class.
Yeah. Do you have any quick tips that you can share with us here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that, I mean, it's something that's on people's minds right now is that there was sort of this meme trend of um, men punching women in the face in Lower Manhattan. That was just last week, and it was really frightening. And a lot of women that were targeted actually came onto TikTok to talk about what happened to them. So I know it was very much in the awareness. And the number one thing based on what I read about that, which is usually it was somebody who was looking at their phone. Like it was almost like these people had been taught, like, find someone who's distracted, go up close to them, bump them and say, "Ooh, excuse me," and then punch them once they
Oh
look
my
up.
gosh.
So
Oh
it's like
my
a formula
gosh.
for hurting. So the thing that I would say for that
Terrible.
is you want to keep your head on a swivel, right? Like you want to be, aware at all times of like who is around, who's behind me, who's on my sides, who's ahead of me.
Mhm.
And not just looking for people who, might have ill intentions, but looking for people who are your neighbors or who are, most people in New York are very kind people, and you can actually have these sort of like temporary friend allies that you kind of like look out for each other, right? We've
Mhm.
probably all experienced that. Um, but I would say if you need to look at your phone while you're walking around in the city, the best thing to do, and just even so you don't trip and fall or bump into someone, is kind of like pull over the way you'd pull a car over to the side of the road. Just pull over, find a building, put your back to the building. So that way you don't have, no one can come up behind you. And if
So
someone wants to come
smart.
up, and they can't, people can fake bumping into you when you're walking in the middle of the sidewalk. But if you're standing in front of a building, it's
Yeah.
much more obviously aggressive that they're coming up to you. So just pull over, do what you need to do on your phone, and then re-enter the flow of traffic. Or even, anytime if you feel uncomfortable, like one thing I would tell my students is, don't feel obligated out of politeness to stick around in any situation. And if someone wants to
Mhm.
say like, "Hey, are you racist because you don't want to like be around me?" I'll be like, "No, I just don't want to be around. I'm not,
Yeah.
anyone who's sort of using this sort of like, this happened to me actually this morning too. This guy was coming out of the bodega and I passed him and we said hi. And he's like, "Can we be friends? Hey, why won't you come back here?" And I was like, "Have a nice day. Like, I'm busy, dude."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't owe anyone anything, and it's fine. And those people, they know in some way that you walking away from them is completely acceptable. But they're trying to manipulate the situation.
Mhm.
And yeah, so just like um kind of prioritizing yourself and like feel uncomfortable, leave, or go into a business and just stay there for a few minutes, find a buddy, but you're usually safer when you're alert, aware, and when you're around other people that are kind of on the same page as you.
That is great advice. And again, Sisters in Self-Defense, that's the name of your group.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people can find about it, can find it on Instagram. That's
Perfect.
where we announce all of our upcoming classes.
Fabulous.
And I also have the kind of outline of this class, the self-preservation class that is in a PDF. So, I let people
That's
know
great.
if you want to see it, you can send me an email at yoursisterandselfdefense@gmail, and I will share it with you.
Perfect. Yeah, and listeners, I'll include direct links on our social media pages at artuncoveredpodcast.com. And you could always just send us an email or something and I can get you in touch. But what a wonderful thing you're doing. That's amazing.
Thanks.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean,
It's been a couple of years now, right? 3 years?
it's been 3 years. It's been
Yeah.
a great experience. Um I've had so many wonderful experiences, met friends, like close friends through it, and it's actually been part of what has enabled me to I worked as a full-time arts administrator for the past 10 years,
Mm.
basically right out of grad school. I got offered a full-time job and I thought, well, I should probably take it and have some stability. But after 10 years, I got through this grant an opportunity to focus on teaching self-defense, and that was sort of
Amazing.
my launching pad. So,
Amazing.
you never know what's gonna come back and feed your art practice.
Yeah, that's incredible. I guess this will be my last question for you. Were you making work that was different prior to doing these self-defense classes?
I think for me, it's not just the self-defense, it's also the way that I've been sort of enfolded into the Chinatown arts and culture and an activist community that's
Okay.
changed my work. And also just being in therapy with an Asian American therapist who has helped me kind of own that I I can and should make art about my culture and these things that are, so a part of me.
Were you resistant to that before?
Well, I was a young artist in Texas where at the time there weren't a lot of Asian American artists, or really, even in a very liberal place like Austin, in some ways it's very liberal, but it at the time was not an environment where I felt that people cared, and I kind of got that feedback. And so there was a lot of pressure to make things that would appeal to an audience that was like universal or the art world. And so that was a big part of, I think, what pushed me to come to New York and come to a place that has a huge Chinatown, and really that I've learned since, I may have some second cousins or something that I see all the time on the street, because a lot of people who came to the US from Hong Kong around the time period when my dad, immigrated, and after, New York is a big hub for Cantonese speaking people and people from Hong Kong. So being in community and having this audience for my work, like, it's such a kind of tender, important thing to me. And I made a lot of sculpture during the pandemic that I had my husband and I went on our honeymoon to Taiwan and Hong Kong, got back the month before lockdown. So I had all these fresh, memories, and we'd done family research while we were out there. And so I made all this work, and I just didn't want to show it anywhere until I could find a venue in Chinatown to show it.
Oh,
And then having that audience from Think Chinatown who would recognize so much in the work and, like, we're excited about it in a sense as, artists, but also in a sense just as people. They were like, this is something that, is telling my story back to me, and, that we were thinking through together. That's really kind of been what's opened it up for me to, it's not that I'm only going to make art that directly relates to my Chinese heritage from now on, but it's something that, there's so much there, and there's so much kind of aesthetic information and culture that I've taken in my whole life that, like, I just didn't know was kind of already in there. And for example, I made this past Lunar New Year, I think Chinatown asked me to be their artist in residence, and they usually have women artists make something to take out into the Lunar New Year parade, or not the parade itself, but into the festivities in the streets in Chinatown. And I decided to make like a full-scale dragon that took like 8 people to carry around in Chinatown.
wow.
And I was like, and I do some research, but I usually try not to overly research things because I want to just see what comes out. And I was like, how do I know what a Chinese dragon looks like? And then I started realizing, like, I've seen pictures and, carvings of this everywhere my whole life. I just never really thought about it, like how that flows into my artwork.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. Well, Alison, thank you so much for sharing your, for having this conversation, for sharing your work and your story. Listeners, if you want to see Alison's work, you have the opportunity until April 20th up at Field Projects. The name of the exhibition is called You Pick the Moon. Can't wait to see it myself. And thank you so much again for your work, both in the art world and the defense world.
Thank you. And I don't know when this is going to be posted, but I also was wondering if I could promote some events that we're having.
Yeah, please go ahead. The mic's yours.
So I think, in that Will was thinking about me as being this kind of community embedded artist. Like, we wanted to have some events to spend time with people at the show. So this Saturday, we have a good friend of mine who is a tattoo artist and who has done my tattoos, is coming to the gallery, and she's going to ask people to take pictures of the work, of details that they are drawn to, and then she's going to make tiny tattoos on their bodies.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And next Friday, my acupuncturist and organizer friend, Dr. Emily Tsai, is coming to give people ear seed treatments. So these are, they don't pierce the skin or anything, but they are acupressure kind of little metal balls that have rhinestones on the outside. So they're very cute, and they go in different points in your ear, depending on what you might be looking to do. And that, can give relief to a variety of ailments. It's great for anxiety or just,
Wow.
whatever's going on. But
And
it's
what
also a
date-
great way
what
to
date
kind
is
of
that?
dip your toe into acupuncture. So that is on Friday, the 12th of
Okay.
April
Okay,
in
fabulous.
the afternoon. Yeah. And then the final program will be on April 20th on the closing day. And an artist whom I admire very much, who also does a lot of work kind of in the Chinatown community, Vincent Chong, will be doing a live portrait painting session of me with my work in the gallery. That Vincent does is a queer performer who does drag, while painting like traditional Chinese calligraphy, and
Oh my God,
also
great.
has this portraiture practice of painting people that they know. And so during all of these programs, I'm also inviting people to come and do still life drawing with the sculpture.
Of
So
your piece, of
of
your
my
piece.
piece,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
because I
great.
really want to see how other people see it, and photography is a great way to see how other people see it. But like, there's just so many kind of juicy details in there that I'm excited about opening that up. And since I've kind of come back into a regular drawing practice myself, I want to share that with people.
That is fabulous. That's fabulous. Okay, so we have so Friday, let's just get these dates right. So we have
April 6th will be in the gallery, but also actually if there's anybody who would like to get a tattoo from Laurel inspired by the piece, she's also offering, you can make appointments with her to go to her studio in Ridgewood and get the tattoos.
Oh, that's great. That's
And
great.
so, there's only so much you can do within, what'll probably be like 30-minute tattooing sessions in the gallery.
Right.
So she's extending that into the future. And Laurel is also somebody who studies acupuncture and qigong, and so getting a tattoo from her is not super different. It is different, but it's a little similar to getting acupuncture in a way, because she creates this like really calm, like nourishing environment, and it's very
Oh, that's awesome.
collaborative.
That's awesome.
And 50% of the proceeds from that will go to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund.
Amazing.
Um,
Amazing. Okay, so in the gallery, that
Right.
is April 6th, right?
April 6th will be in the gallery, and then the ear seeds will be on April 12th from
Okay,
4 to 5:30.
perfect.
And Vincent Chong will be painting in the gallery on Saturday, April 20th from 2 to 4 p.m.
Perfect. So, listeners, if you're around New York City, visit Field Projects. A lot of amazing events going on, and I'll include like a text description of all of those events and links and everything like that on our social media and whatnot. Alison, thank you again
Great.
so much for this chat. It was
you.
wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you for your lovely questions.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Please tune in next week as I will be speaking with Frankie Francis Cannon, an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and educator who is the Mellon Science and Nature Writing Fellow at Kenyon College. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Frankie's merging of art and writing, her visual book reviews, and her book, Walter Benjamin Reimagined, which was published by MIT Press. Hope to see you all then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.